Welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving into something that literally touches almost all of our lives at some point, and that is debt. But we're not just going to sit here and look at spreadsheets today. No, we're exploring the very human reality of how financial institutions actually collect that debt. We'll be unpacking a totally brilliant analysis by Oluyomi Oladavid titled On Debt Collection, Like Family and Friends or Like Foe. Let's jump right into her insights on the ethics of modern finance. Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll start with the goal of lenders. Then we'll look at friends versus foes. Third, the high costs of borrowing. Fourth, we'll explore the Rosca alternative. And finally, wrap up with fostering financial inclusion. I want to kick things off right out of the gate with this incredibly powerful quote from her work. She writes, "Whatever happens when debtors are running late with their scheduled repayments reveal the value systems of the creditors." Take a second to really process that. She's framing late payments not just as some dry breach of contract, but as the ultimate stress test of a lender's true character. When the system works perfectly, everyone's happy, right? But the second a borrower stumbles, that is the exact moment the mask drops, and we see the core values of the institution they're dealing with. Okay, Section 1, the goal of lenders, keeping the cycle steady. She starts out by establishing a shared, universal goal for literally all lenders. So whether we're talking about a small, informal neighborhood money lender or a massive, formal financial institution, their survival depends on one main thing: a steady stream of creditworthy customers paying on schedule. This predictability is exactly what keeps the cycle of credit steady and available throughout all those natural business cycles. Without this steady stream, the entire lending ecosystem just collapses. So it turns out both the borrower and the lender actually share a huge mutual interest in the system functioning smoothly. Moving on to Section 2, friends versus foes, two paths of debt collection. Now, when a borrower inevitably runs late because life happens, she argues the narrative splits down two very, very distinct paths. First, we have the friends. These are your patient lenders. They offer extensions or allow piecemeal payments to basically retain a customer for the long haul. But on the other hand, we have the foes. She points out some truly draconian methods used by aggressive fintech firms operating in places like Nigeria. According to her analysis of actual customer reports, these firms recruit unpleasant representatives who use flat-out threats. And even worse, they engage in awful shaming practices. They'll actively circulate a borrower's private debt information to their personal social circles just to publicly force prompt repayment. It's intense. But here's what's really interesting about the actual business consequence of these tactics. Yeah, sending a threatening message might force an embarrassed debtor to scrape together funds, often through beggarly means, just to pay you back today. But the stark reality is this: unethical actions equal immediate gratification, but long-term loss. She argues that this crude, unfriendly approach creates completely irrecoverable customer losses. Think about it. Nobody goes back to a lender that humiliated them. Consequently, these aggressive firms have to constantly spend massive amounts of money on advertising just to replace the customers they're burning through. Ultimately, acting as a foe completely backfires on their own business model. Which brings us to Section 3, high costs of borrowing, the double-digit problem. So looking at business climes like Nigeria, she observes a massive structural issue driving all of this: the persistence of double-digit interest rates, even on short-term personal loans. Just think about what this means on the ground for a second. People are taking out loans to fuel small business development, or maybe just as a temporary salary advance to survive the month. But when you slap exorbitant double-digit lending costs on top of that, you instantly destroy the potential profits of that very business. The loan, which was supposed to be the fuel for growth, basically becomes an anchor. It creates this high-pressure environment where default is almost mathematically guaranteed for some folks, which, in turn, triggers those aggressive collection tactics we were just talking about. Let's look at Section 4. The Rosca alternative, zero-cost solutions. Faced with these, frankly hostile formal lending conditions, she points out that people naturally turn to informal, social forms of saving. Enter the Rosca. That stands for Rotating Savings and Credit Associations. She defines these as brilliant, community-driven systems where trusted members of a close-knit social or work circle pool their money together to save and lend to one another. You completely bypass the institutional money lender, you bypass the aggressive fintech app, and you bypass the threat of public shaming entirely. You're dealing directly with your actual peers. And the absolute most crucial point here is the number 0. The Rosca model thrives because it carries little to zero transaction costs. There are no double-digit interest rates eating away at your capital, because it relies entirely on mutual trust within a pre-existing social fabric, It acts as the perfect shield against the predatory lending practices out there in the broader market. It's just a fascinating example of communities self-organizing to fill the massive gaps left by a failing formal system. Finally, Section 5, Fostering Financial Inclusion, Government Action. She forcefully argues that for a government to foster true financial inclusion, they really have to move past mere lip service. She outlines 3 specific, very pragmatic policy steps. First, crash lending rates down to as low as 1 to 2% to actually boost economic activity and curb high youth unemployment. Second, earmark specific credit guarantees for targeted groups. And third, establish and monitor proper financial reporting and credit scores. She isn't presenting these as idealistic dreams, but as necessary mechanical adjustments to fix a broken economic engine. Let's look a little closer at exactly who she says should receive those earmarked credit guarantees. She specifically targets vulnerable yet highly capable demographics. We're talking about women, low-income earners, and what she uniquely calls the no-income class, specifically noting the educated unemployed. These are people, particularly youths, who have totally viable business ideas but absolutely no funding to get them off the ground. By directing government credit guarantees right here, she argues you empower the exact people who can boost household production and really stimulate grassroots economic growth. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate goal of her policy recommendations. When a government steps up to establish proper financial reporting and a reliable credit score system, the whole dynamic shifts. Lenders no longer need to rely on threats and shaming tactics because the risk is mathematically managed. Systemic trust replaces raw intimidation. Proper financial reporting allows financial service agents to shift away from acting as foes and actually empowers them to act more like family and friends to their customers. The system finally becomes constructive rather than destructive. But until those systemic changes are fully realized, she offers this final piece of practical, if somewhat sobering, advice for current borrowers out there. She notes, otherwise, the best thing a sincere debtor can do is plead patience and understanding till they can pay up fully, with the hope that their creditors will be merciful. It's a pretty stark reminder of the vulnerability borrowers face right now in unfavorable climates, relying on the hope of mercy rather than the protection of a fair, functional system. Which brings us to the end of our explainer today, and leaves us with this provocative question to chew on. When you fall behind, does your financial institution treat you like family or like a foe? Oluyomi Oladevid's work challenges all of us to demand frameworks that actually build people up rather than tear them down. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this incredible analysis today, and keep asking those big questions.